Last week we talked about the pyramids and how a Bronze Age civilization somehow built the most precisely engineered structure in human history, using copper tools and sheer determination. This week we are going somewhere even more controversial. We are going underwater. Specifically, we are going to talk about Atlantis. And before you roll your eyes and mutter something about science fiction and New Age nonsense, I want you to stay with me. Because the actual story of Atlantis is considerably stranger, considerably older, and considerably more credible than most people realize. Let us start at the beginning. The year is 360 BC. The place is ancient Athens. A philosopher named Plato, and yes, that Plato, the one your philosophy teacher banged on about, sits down and writes two dialogues called Timaeus and Critias. In them he describes, in remarkable detail, a powerful island civilization that existed approximately 9,000 years before his own time. So roughly 9600 BC, he describes its location as being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is what the ancient Greeks called the Strait of Gibraltar. He describes its size as larger than Libya and Asia combined. He describes its people as technologically advanced, militarily powerful, and morally corrupt. And he describes its fate, swallowed by the ocean in a single day and night of catastrophic flooding. Now here is where most people stop and say, right, obviously Plato made it up. It is an allegory, a moral fable, a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and corruption dressed up as history. And that is a perfectly reasonable position. Except for a few rather inconvenient details that make the allegory theory somewhat difficult to fully defend. Detail number 1. Plato was extremely specific. Suspiciously specific, some would say. He described Atlantis in architectural detail, concentric rings of land and water surrounding a central island, a massive temple to Poseidon at the center, canals connecting the rings to the sea, a plain to the north of the city measuring 3,000 stades by 2,000 stads, hot and cold running springs, a mountain range to the north. He even described the color of the stone they used to build with, black, white, and red. This is not the level of detail you include in an allegory. This is the level of detail you include when you are describing somewhere real. Detail number 2. Plato specifically said this was not a story he invented. He claimed the account came from the Athenian statesman Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests during a visit to the city of Sais around 590 BC. The priests allegedly told Solon that the Greeks were essentially children compared to the Egyptians in terms of historical memory, and that the story of Atlantis was preserved in their records going back thousands of years. Now Solon was a real person. His visit to Egypt is historically documented. The city of Sais and its temple records were real. Plato was not an idiot. He knew the difference between a parable and a historical account. He presented this as the latter, so where was it? This is where things get genuinely fascinating, because there are currently no fewer than 50 serious academic theories about the location of Atlantis, and some of them are considerably more compelling than others. Let us go through the main contenders. Theory 1. The Mediterranean, specifically the island of Santorini, or Thera as it was known in antiquity. Around 1600 BC, Thera was home to the Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced cultures in the ancient world. They had indoor plumbing, multi-story buildings, sophisticated art, and extensive trade networks. Then, around 1620 BC, the volcano at the center of the island erupted in one of the largest volcanic events in human history. The eruption was so powerful, it is believed to have triggered tsunamis up to 150 meters high across the eastern Mediterranean. The Minoan civilization collapsed shortly afterwards. The island itself partially sank into the sea, leaving the distinctive crescent shape you see on maps today. The resemblance to Plato's account is obvious. The timing is wrong by about 8,000 years, but some scholars argue Plato's timeline was mistranslated and the original figure was 900 years, not 9,000. Theory 2. The Atlantic Ocean, specifically the Azores Plateau, a raised section of the mid-Atlantic ridge that sits relatively close to the surface of the ocean west of Portugal. Geological surveys have found evidence of land masses in this region that were above sea level during the last ice age, when global sea levels were significantly lower than they are today. At the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 12,000 BC, global sea levels rose by approximately 120 meters as the ice sheets melted. Any civilization living on low-lying Atlantic coastal land or islands at that time would have experienced catastrophic and relatively rapid flooding. The timeline matches Plato's account almost perfectly. Theory 3, and this one is my personal favorite for sheer audacity, Antarctica. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis produced a map of the world that included a remarkably accurate depiction of the Antarctic coastline. The problem is that Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and the coastline shown on the Piri Reis map corresponds not to the ice-covered coast we know today, but to the subglacial coastline underneath the ice, which has not been visible for approximately 6,000 years and was only mapped using modern seismic technology in the 20th century. How a Turkish admiral in 1513 had access to accurate maps of an ice-free Antarctic coastline remains entirely unexplained. But here is the theory that has gained the most serious academic traction in recent years, and it does not require lost continents or dramatic volcanic eruptions. It requires something far simpler and far more unsettling. What if Atlantis was not a place that sank, but a civilization that existed before the last ice age ended, was largely destroyed by the catastrophic flooding that followed, and the survivors carried their memories and knowledge into what we now call the ancient world? This theory, championed by researchers like Graham Hancock, suggests that the mainstream archaeological timeline of human civilization, which places the beginning of complex society at around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, is simply wrong. That there was an earlier civilization, more advanced than we give it credit for, that was effectively reset by the geological catastrophe at the end of the last ice age around 10,800 BC. The evidence for this is not nothing. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in 1994, is a complex of precisely carved stone pillars arranged in circles that dates to approximately 9600 BC, the exact date Plato gave for Atlantis. It is the oldest known monumental architecture in the world, and it was built by people who were supposedly hunter-gatherers with no knowledge of agriculture or complex society. The site was deliberately buried, which is itself extraordinary. Nobody buries a monument unless they are trying to preserve it or hide it. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe knew what they were doing, knew it was important, and took deliberate steps to protect it. So where does that leave us with Atlantis? The honest answer is the same place we ended up with the pyramids last week. We do not know. We have theories. We have fragments of evidence. We have one very detailed account from a very credible ancient source that most mainstream historians dismiss as fiction without fully engaging with the specific details that make that dismissal uncomfortable. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically and rapidly by historical standards. Coastal civilizations would have been devastated. The memory of that catastrophe would have been passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years before being recorded. Whether that memory became the story of Atlantis, the story of Noah's flood, or dozens of other flood myths found in cultures across the world that have no contact with each other, that is a question worth sitting with. Next week on StickHis, we are tackling Stonehenge. Who built it? How they moved stones weighing up to 25 tons from Wales to Wiltshire without wheels or metal tools, and why the official explanation keeps quietly changing every few years. Subscribe and bring your questions. Same Stickman. Different mystery.